Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again, and I wanted to show you just a couple of things today. Starting off with somewhat of an update for the Voltaxic Pierce Frostwall Lightning Arrow character, and there's not too much to talk about or too much to update, just more or less going to let you know it's still pretty damn good and nothing's really changed. So the conversion change on Voltaxic meant that instead of converting 100% lightning to chaos, it instead does 60%. And that's really not a big deal, it didn't change too much. Effectively, your damage should probably be a bit worse against really resistant targets, but besides that, it's not a very big deal. You still do lots of chaos and you still do lots of damage, and you can still run Ele Reflect maps without an issue as long as you have Vaal Pact. And when you're in the higher levels of maps and running red tier maps, you probably should have Vaal Pact anyway. So all that really changed is Vaal Pact has to become a bit more mandatory, and you probably want to pick a different 6th link, which I'll go over in just a second. But this is just a quick Uber run I did on standard with the exact same setup without changing anything except for one gem, and as you can see, as long as Frostwall and Lightning Arrow with Pierce, the whole mechanics aren't changed, then you're good to go. And you can apply this to fucking any bow build still. Lightning Arrow, Frostwall, Pierce mechanics. It's gonna face roll Uber Series no matter what. So the changes that I did make are, hold on, boom, mask. The changes are a simple removal of the Void Manipulation gem, because since it does basically just a lot more chaos damage, and only 60% of your damage is now chaos, you don't really want it, so you want to get rid of Void Manipulation, though you can still use it if you really want, and sub it out for Slower Proj, ideally, because you still have the same amount of chaos, essentially, as you can tell, but Slower Proj also affects your lightning and gives you a higher tooltip based off of that. The only real issue with that is that you can noticeably see your projectiles are slower, but they're still okay, and it should still off-screen well enough for you. Also, it's a 1 at 40% mana multiplier instead of a 120, so if you haven't quite fixed your mana yet, mana will be a bit more of an issue. You go from 43 mana to 50 mana a cast. At this level I have plenty of unreserved mana, so it doesn't really matter too much to me to cast a few extra times. I use Vial Clarity, and I have Mana Leech, so it's not a big deal. Your other options, however, are increased critical strikes. That is a pretty decent DPS change as well, and helps you hit your crit cap just a bit closer, because the build itself only has something like 40 crit without buffs, about 50 with buffs, so critical strikes lends you to get a lot more consistency out of the build, and that's certainly a choice you can make. The other choice you can make is increased crit damage, and that does get a bit better when you get power charges going too. But that'll probably make you more vulnerable to, say, Elemental Reflect maps, because then you end up hitting harder and have a greater chance to one-shot yourself. I tried out Ele Reflect with Slower Proj, and it was no problem for Ele Reflect maps, since most of your hits are pretty staggered thanks to Lightning Arrow, the way it works with its projectiles and the chains, that you're never really going to one-shot yourself, so as long as you stagger your hits and end up leeching, you should be fine with those maps. The only other thing there is to mention is the last 2 Ascendancy points. These are all fine still, you'd still take these 4, still take these 2. Your last 2 points should go towards Powerful Precision. Now, the Return Projectile mod does pretty much fucking nothing, because as long as you pierce, chain, fork, whatever, then your projectiles won't return to you. They'll only return to you if nothing happens, and that's going to be never. The reason you take it though is for the 10 extra crit it will provide you, because your projectiles always have a 100% chance to pierce. So you'll just get a free 10 crit out of this node, and that goes a long way towards the consistency for your crits. That's basically all that happened with Voltaxic. Still a very good bow, still a very good build to play, or you could play any other sort of Lightning Arrow Frostwall either way. Now next up, what I wanted to show you was some good old-fashioned vintage banana throw. This is a Nice non-crit Ele Buzzsaw that I've just recently remade on Prophecy League as a raider. For what it is, it's been working rather well. The idea was basically I hadn't really done a good non-crit buzzsaw in quite a while, and that's what Elemental Buzzsaw was back in the olden days. It was just a good, stable starting build, essentially. As non-crit, it was easy to build and it could tackle all the content in the game. Now, the fact that we're tied to frenzy charges makes it just a little more uncomfortable for that purpose, tackling all the content in the game. But overall, the current version of non-crit Ele Buzzsaw that I've made here is still roughly the same build as before. You still get similar amounts of attack speed, it can do everything in game, but the difference is nowadays it has something like 5 times the DPS, and it also uses GMP. Back in my day, I used LMP for Elemental Buzzsaw, because you needed it just to squeeze out as much damage as possible. Nowadays, you have about 5 times more tooltip at the top end, even with fucking GMP. So, the theory runs were, a good few minutes a boss, whereas nowadays it'll take a few minutes for the entire run, and the character is still relatively easy to build, at least once the league is established, and still extremely fast and satisfying to play. Now, ultimately, you're probably going to want to be crit, because there's not really any reason to not go crit. You get more out of it for damage. Overall, it's just going to be a little bit harder to build and a bit harder to balance your defenses while also balancing your offense. This non-crit Ele Buzzsaw as a raider is just really comfortable to start out as and play without being very gear required or really have to worry too much about balancing your crit, accuracy, all that sort of shit, because the gear's cheap and just your requirements aren't that steep, since you don't have to worry about crit or crit multi or fitting in several bullshit items that are going to hurt your character, like a Facebreakers or a Rat's Nest, etc., or even dual wielding, I suppose. And on top of that, these days there's just so many more avenues to actually scale your damage, non-crit, that you probably don't even need to be crit for most of the game anyway. If you're not going to be going for speed running red maps, or core Malachais, or maybe even Uber Siri, although I think this build probably could do it, then this build's just fine, and you'll get a very fast playstyle out of it, because Raider gives you all those frenzy charges and gives you such a fast whirling blade attack speed that it just feels so nice to travel around, and also have something like 6 or 7 attacks per second on your Spectral Throw, which is just a bit faster than what old Spectral Throw Buzzsaw used to have. So I've been playing this character fairly comfortably up to tier 10s or 11s now, in the low level 80s. I know for a fact it's going to drop off a bit in the red maps, because that's when things start to get bad for non-crit characters, and especially bad for elemental characters. That's where you have to run into resisted maps, Enfeeble, Elemental Equilibrium. Now that said, I think I can still comfortably do red maps. It's just going to actually dent my clear speed a bit when I have to do them with certain bad mods. But that will be seen in the future. As far as this character goes though, I'll show you what the current setup is in case you want to play it. I should mention there's probably several different ways you could go about building this type of character, and this is just the way I have decided to do it and the way I've thought would probably be best for me at the moment. Character's about level 84 now, a raider, and it's on the Prophecy League. I have 4700 life, which will go up quite substantially in the next few levels, and pretty capped resists. Resists are really easy to get on this build. Also got 40% chance to evade attacks, 39% chance to dodge, and 15% spell dodge, all of which goes up another 10% thanks to the raider passives as we get them. So the ones I've gone for this build are the frenzy nodes and the phasing nodes. This basically means I'm going to be running 9 frenzies, and each frenzy is worth an extra 3% attack speed and 3% attack damage. On top of the fact that they already give 4 attack speed and 4% more damage, that just makes frenzies insane for this build. And then we end up going the phasing route, because Onslaught just doesn't feel quite worth it for me. The phasing route means you will have phasing basically 100% of the time. Anytime you have 9 frenzy charges up, and you do pretty much always, they last 18 seconds, meaning your phasing is going to be up at the very least for 18 seconds. But if it keeps refreshing, you'll have permanent phasing. Now what phasing basically means is it's going to give you an extra 10% spell dodge, and it just lets you run through shit. So it's not that substantial, but the things that you get out of phasing here are very substantial. Immune to elemental status ailments means that you cannot be shocked and you cannot be frozen or ignited while your phasing's up. So that's pretty much always. That lets you run a Vinctor's without any downside essentially, which means you shock everything around you and you get a good bit of penetration from the lightning damage penetration mod there. So overall I end up going for this just for defensiveness, defensivity, whatever the fuck. Because this just didn't quite feel worth it, I'll still have Onslaught up with my Silver Flask almost always, and it should be good. The travel is a bit brutal because we're still going all the way up here and grabbing Elemental Overload. Since you don't really need Resolute Techniques, I'm sustaining a nice comfortable 89% chance to hit at the moment. Resolute Techniques is not that necessary, and Elemental Overload is up almost all of the time. So we lose about 10% damage from our chance to hit, because we've only got 90%, but we gain an extra 40% more elemental damage if you've crit in the past 8 seconds, which is almost always, meaning it's a net gain of about 30% more damage. Quite worth it, I feel, for the extra few points we use to get there, and it also helps fill out int for the actual build. Besides that, you just travel around getting life, wed, elemental damage, proj damage, and all the frenzies, as well as some life leech, saving you the link in your setup. We also get a bit of pen there, and I'm currently filling out to get phase aggro, because with phase aggro and phasing and all that, I'll end up having something like 55 or 65, 55 I think, chance to dodge spells, which is quite freaking nice. So as far as our weapon goes, these days the best in slot for the non-crit version of Buzzsaws is going to be a claw. Now that is simply because both foils and claws now have a 1.6 attack speed at their best, and all you're looking for is a better implicit from claws, which has some nice life gain on hit. You can get up to about 34 I think on an Imperial. Mine's currently got pretty crappy, but it helps just against Reflect. Since we have small consistent hits, this will help you sustain against Elemental Reflect and even just about anything in general. So if you can, try and get a claw. But essentially what you're looking for is as fast as possible, but these days you can get lots of LE damage on your weapons, so look out for that too. I think this is about 350 EDPS, and anything over 300 is essentially what you're looking for, and it's pretty damn cheap. Get a sword or a claw. Claw is ideal though, and they should run you anywhere from like 10 to 20C. As far as a chest goes, I'm going with Lionized Vision right now because it essentially makes an easy 6-link for me. Pierce Gem gives me an extra 25% more damage, even though the Pierce mod does nothing because we already pierce 100% of the time, since that's what Spectral Throw does. But it does give you an extra 25% damage. So running this means I don't have to run a 6-link, essentially, but if I get this in a 6-link, then I'll be running technically a 7-link. So that's just another way of scaling massive amounts of damage. And the current links are Spectral Throw, GMP, Blood Magic, Wed, and Ele Focus. Now you can get rid of Blood Magic if you think you can sustain your mana, and you might be able to do that with some mana on hit on your claw, as well as some mana leech, as well as maybe some other things like Essence Sap or mana on hit jewels. I just didn't find it comfortable enough when attacking 6 times a second for, well, around 30 mana at the very least. On a 5 or a 6 link it goes up to about 40 mana, so it's just not too comfortable. The entire Spectral Throw playstyle is just much better suited to Blood Magic. And since I'm running Blood Magic, it means I can reserve almost 100% of my mana with both Wrath and Anger. And that means I'm wearing an Alpha's Howl for +4 in total aura gems, just like we used to on Buzzsaw. And since I'm running an Alpha's Howl, I have 8% reduced mana reserve, so I don't quite reserve all of my mana, which lets me cast Golem and Blood Rage and Frenzy all off of mana without having to attach Blood Magic, as well as my Ancestral War Chief Brototem, which helps me out for single target damage as well. So single target's really not that bad, especially when you have your totem up or your frenzies, and once again, once you put in your slow projectiles over your GMP, because Slower Proj gives you 28% more damage, and you also no longer have 20% less damage, meaning it's a very large net gain, going from 20k DPS all the way up to 33. And it does make your projectile speed complete bullshit, meaning you have to pretty much melee mobs, but most of the time it's worth it and completely doable. So in total, it does give you a far better damage range than you'd ever had before on classic Buzzsaw. The rest of the gear is pretty straightforward and fairly obvious. I went with some serious steps with +1 frenzy charges because I got lucky with those. Otherwise, you can go Dark Ray Vectors or corrupt some other boots for +1 frenzy. Even without the +1 frenzy, it's not that important. You can kind of go whatever boots you want. Besides that, like I said, everything else is very straightforward. Try and get some accuracy somewhere. I managed to get it on my gloves, which should be your easiest piece, because trying to get wed, life, resists, and accuracy on your jewelry is kind of costly, whereas all of this shit cost me like 10 to 20C a piece. Not very hard to get. Belt's pretty damn easy. I could actually drop quite a lot of resists now that I've got, I don't know, a shield I think is what I recently added, because I figured out dueling just wasn't worth it. So resists are really easy to camp, overcamp. You could even duel, but it's not particularly worth it. It's probably best just to drop some resists on your jewelry and actually maintain a bit better DPS there. There's not much else to say. Running a Stibnite for defense, Ziri's Promise for damage, and Vessel of Victor is highly recommended if you're going the whole phasing route like I did. All in all, the character's pretty decent for non-crit. It's easy to build, it's got a really nice fast playstyle. Even without frenzies, the whirl speed is quite chunky. And it's satisfying, I guess, is what I should say. Ultimately though, you're probably going to get more bang for your buck out of going a crit build, which I'll link in the description as well for a raider version of the crit Ele Buzzsaw. If you want to maximize your deeps, you probably want to go an Inquisitor and start as a Templar, because that means you won't have to worry about elemental resists or anything like that in the endgame maps. The problem with that is it's kinda hard to build as an Inquisitor, because you have to do a lot of travel, you have to balance your crit, your life, your defenses, your accuracy, all that junk, and it becomes quite costly and quite uncomfortable, and your attack speed is going to be pretty much dog shit. But you'll have a lot better damage overall. In any case, that's Elemental Buzzsaw. I hope you enjoyed a bit of a blast from the past. I'll maybe have another video of this in a day or two, as if I feel like it's worthy having another update. But in the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.